Congratulations, you've just woken up in 15th century England. The year is 1447 and you're in London, a bustling city of narrow, twisting streets and timber-framed houses. The smell of smoke from countless hearth fires mingles with the less pleasant aromas of a medieval city. Animal waste, rotting garbage, and the Thames River, which serves as both water source and sewer. But you have bigger concerns right now. You've been accused of treason against King Henry VI. The charge is false, of course, a result of court politics and the whispers of enemies. But in this world, truth is often less important than power. And now you find yourself being led through the imposing stone gatehouse of the Tower of London, a fortress that has stood for nearly 400 years. The good news is that the tower is a royal palace, home to splendid halls and royal apartments with colourful tapestries and fine furnishings. The bad news is that you're not heading to those parts. Instead, the yeoman warders, in their distinctive uniforms, are escorting you deeper into the fortress, toward the dark dungeons below the White Tower. These yeoman warders, the guards of the tower, aren't just any soldiers. They're specially selected veterans with years of loyal service to the crown. In your time, they'd be something like elite security guards with a perfect service record. Their job isn't just to keep you in, it's to make sure everything that happens within these walls stays within these walls. As you descend worn stone steps into the dungeon level, the air grows noticeably colder and damper. The walls glisten with moisture, and your torch casts jumping shadows across the rough stone. The passage narrows, and you have to duck your head to avoid striking it on the low ceiling. The smell changes too. A musty mix of mould, human waste, and something else. Something metallic and sickly sweet that makes your stomach clench. You're brought to a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. One of the warders produces a large key, and with a screech of metal, the door swings open. The chamber beyond is surprisingly large but windowless, lit only by a few sputtering torches in wall sconces. The dancing light reveals a room that seems designed to inspire dread. This is the torture chamber of the Tower of London, and it's been in operation since the reign of King Edward the Fawn in the late 13th century. It's not just any torture chamber, it's the place where the most sophisticated methods of pain and coercion in England are practiced. The man who oversees this chamber has been granted the title of the Duke of Exeter's daughter, a darkly humorous nickname for the rack, which was introduced to England by the Duke of Exeter in 1420. In the centre of the room stands that very device, the rack. It's a rectangular wooden frame with rollers at both ends. Ropes attached to these rollers connect to manacles meant for wrists and ankles. By turning the rollers with levers, the victim's body can be stretched, dislocating joints and tearing muscles. It's a device designed specifically to cause excruciating pain without immediately killing its victim. Along the walls are other instruments, thumb screws which crush the fingers, the scavenger's daughter which compresses the body instead of stretching it, manacles for suspending prisoners by their wrists, and an assortment of irons, pliers and knives whose purposes you'd rather not contemplate. The chamber is designed to work on your mind before it works on your body. The mere sight of these instruments is meant to break your will and convince you to confess before the physical torture even begins. This psychological manipulation has a name, territio realis, and it's a calculated part of the torture process. Two men await you in the chamber. One is Sir John Paulet, the lieutenant of the Tower, responsible for high-profile prisoners. The other is a broad-shouldered man with thick forearms and calloused hands. This is Master Edward Dalton, the King's official torturer, a position that has existed since the time of King John in the early 13th century. Contrary to what you might expect, Dalton isn't a savage brute who enjoys inflicting pain. He's a professional with a specific job: to extract confessions and information. He follows procedures and rules laid down by centuries of practice. Torture in medieval England isn't arbitrary cruelty. It's a regulated process within the justice system. "Do you know why you're here?" Sir John asks, his voice surprisingly gentle. Before you can answer, he continues, "You stand accused of conspiring against His Majesty King Henry. The penalty for treason is death, but a confession now might spare you the worst of what awaits." You protest your innocence, but Sir John merely sighs. "They all say that at first," he says. "Master Dalton, show our guest what awaits those who refuse to speak truthfully." The torturer steps forward, his face impassive. "The process begins with questioning," he explains, as if discussing the weather. "If you provide satisfactory answers, there's no need for what comes next." He gestures to the rack. This is where the exam rigorosum occurs, the rigorous examination. First, we will strip you and bind your wrists. Then we will ask our questions again. If you still refuse to cooperate, we begin with the lesser tortures. Dalton picks up a thumbscrew, a simple device consisting of metal bars with a screw mechanism. This, he says, compresses the thumb or fingers until the bones crack. Most speak before it comes to that. He sets it down and moves to the rack. If the lesser methods fail, we progress to this. Your arms and legs are secured here, and as we turn these levers, the ropes tighten. First comes pain as your joints stretch, then dislocation. Eventually, if necessary, the limbs separate from the body. Few endure past the first dislocation. His clinical description is almost worse than a threat. This isn't personal for him, it's just his job, performed with the detached efficiency of any skilled craftsman. But that's not all, Sir John adds. The mind breaks before the body, for most. We've held men in these dungeons for years, in darkness, in silence, with only enough food and water to keep them alive. Time loses meaning. Sleep becomes a torment, interrupted by questioning. The world shrinks to these stone walls. He leans closer. Think on that before you force us to more extreme measures. A confession now means a quick death. Resistance, he leaves the sentence unfinished. The fate that awaits you is the same that befell Cuthbert Simpson, a Protestant deacon arrested during the reign of Catholic Queen Mary Tudor, just a century from now in your current timeline. For refusing to name his fellow worshippers, Simpson endured the rack 3 separate times. During one session, the torturer drove an arrow through his bound fingers. Despite this agony, Simpson never broke. His reward for such extraordinary courage, being burned alive at Smithfield in 1558. But it's not just religious dissenters who face the torture chamber. Political prisoners, suspected spies, and accused traitors all find themselves here. Guy Fawkes, who will be caught in a plot to blow up Parliament in 1605, will endure such severe torture that his signature on his confession will be barely recognisable, a shaky scrawl from a man whose body has been broken. "One last chance," Sir John says. "Confess now, name your co-conspirators, and earn the king's mercy." You stand at a crossroads. Torture in the tower is not just about pain, it's about breaking the will, destroying resistance through a combination of physical agony and psychological terror. Everything about this chamber, from its underground location to its specific instruments, is designed to maximize fear and despair. The torturer waits patiently. This is just another day for him. Unlike the sadistic Bishop Bonner, the devil's dancing bear, who will torture hundreds during Queen Mary's reign a century from now, Master Dalton takes no pleasure in his work. He's simply performing his duty to the crown, extracting information deemed necessary for the security of the realm. The practice of torture in England has rules, at least in theory. It requires a warrant, usually signed by members of the Privy Council. It's supposed to be used only in cases of treason, not for ordinary crimes, and it's meant to extract information, not as punishment itself. But in practice, these distinctions offer little comfort to those strapped to the rack or suspended by their wrists. Sir John gestures, and the guards move to seize you. The moment of choice has passed. Whether innocent or guilty, you're now caught in a system where pain is a tool of statecraft and human bodies are vessels to be broken for information. As they begin to remove your clothing, the first step in the torture process, you realize why medieval torture chambers were so effective. It's not just the physical pain, though, that's certainly terrible enough. It's the complete powerlessness, the knowledge that you're entirely at the mercy of others who see your suffering as necessary and justified. The cold air of the chamber raises goosebumps on your skin. The stone floor chills your bare feet. The manacles close around your wrists with a decisive click. And as Master Dalton approaches with a look of professional concentration, you understand with crystal clarity why few people would last even a day in a medieval torture chamber. The true horror lies not just in the devices of pain, but in the methodical, almost bureaucratic application of suffering. In the medieval mind, the body is a path to truth. Break the body, and the truth will emerge. Whether that's actually accurate is beside the point. The system believes it to be so, and that belief has deadly consequences for those caught within it. As Dalton prepares to begin his work, the torches on the wall flicker, casting monstrous, dancing shadows across the ancient stone walls that have witnessed centuries of human suffering. These walls have absorbed countless screams that never reached the outside world, and now they wait patiently to absorb yours. The first question comes, and with it the beginning of your ordeal in one of history's most feared institutions, a place where justice and cruelty blur into a single terrible experience that few survived with body and mind intact. Outside the tower, London continues its daily business, unaware or uncaring of what happens in the darkness beneath the White Tower. This separation between the public face of justice and its hidden machinery is part of what makes the torture chamber so effective. It exists in shadow, spoken of in whispers, its true horrors known only to those unfortunate enough to experience them firsthand. As the first device is prepared, you understand why medieval torture was so feared, and why its legacy continues to haunt our collective imagination centuries later. This is not just about the pain of the body, but the breaking of the human spirit, a methodical dismantling of everything that makes a person whole. And as Dalton's instruments begin their work, the dungeon fills with echoes that join the ghostly chorus of all who came before you in this chamber of sorrows, a chorus that spans centuries and continues long after your own voice falls silent. Master Dalton approaches with an unsettling calmness. His movements are neither rushed nor hesitant. He moves with the practiced efficiency of a craftsman who has performed the same tasks countless times before. For him, this is not cruelty, but craftsmanship. The chamber around you, cold and damp, has been carefully designed for its purpose, not just to inflict pain, but to break the spirit before the body. We begin with simple methods, Dalton explains, selecting a pair of thumb screws from his collection of instruments. Most confess before we progress further. The thumb screw, is a simple device. Metal bars connected by screws. Your thumb is placed between the bars, and as the screw tightens, pressure increases until the bone cracks. Effective despite its simplicity, it's a favorite of torturers throughout Europe. Originally used by the Russian army to discipline soldiers, the device spread westward where it found new purpose in extracting confessions. Sir John observes from a corner, his face betraying no emotion. As Lieutenant of the Tower, he has witnessed countless interrogations. For him, this is statecraft, necessary unpleasantness in service to the crown. Tell us of your conspirators, he says. Who plotted with you against His Majesty? You protest your innocence again, knowing it's futile. In this system, accusation itself is nearly proof of guilt. The question isn't whether you'll confess, but how much pain you'll endure before doing so. Dalton doesn't immediately apply the thumbscrew. Instead, he places it on a small brazier. Cold metal is uncomfortable, he explains. Heated metal is unbearable. This attention to detail reveals the sophisticated understanding of pain that medieval torturers possessed. They knew that anticipation amplifies suffering. Every moment you watch the metal redden in the coals is a moment of mounting terror. The chamber itself aids in this psychological torment. Windowless and underground, it exists outside normal time. There is no day or night here, only the eternal flickering of torches. The walls are thick enough that no scream penetrates to the outside world. You are utterly removed from society, in a place where normal rules no longer apply. While we wait, Dalton continues, perhaps you'd like to see what awaits should you remain stubborn. He gestures to another device, the strappado. It consists of a simple rope and pulley system attached to the ceiling. The victim's hands are tied behind their back and connected to the rope. Then they're hoisted upward, dislocating the shoulders. Sometimes weights are added to the feet for additional agony. The beauty of this method, Dalton explains with professional pride, is its simplicity. We need not even touch you. Your own body weight does our work for us. The torturer's matter-of-fact explanations are part of the process. By describing what will happen, he plants vivid images in your mind. Your imagination becomes his accomplice, multiplying your fear. In the shadowy corner stands a third device, the scavenger's daughter. Unlike the rack, which stretches the body, this fiendish contraption compresses it. The victim is forced into a crouching position, then metal bands are tightened until movement becomes impossible. As pressure increases, breathing grows difficult. Eventually, blood vessels rupture, and blood emerges from the nose, ears, and fingernails. An English invention, Sir John notes with an unsettling hint of pride. Designed by Sir Leonard Skeffington during the reign of Henry VIII. You notice something important about these instruments. They're designed to cause maximum pain without causing death. A dead prisoner tells no secrets. The medieval torturer walks a fine line, applying enough agony to break resistance without ending life prematurely. By now, the thumbscrew is heated to a dull red glow. Dalton removes it from the brazier with tongs and approaches you. The guards hold your arms firmly. The moment has arrived. One more chance, Sir John offers. Speak now, and this can end. But what could you confess to? The charges are false. Yet as the hot metal nears your hand, truth and falsehood lose meaning. The only reality is the imminent pain and the desperate desire to avoid it. This is the dark genius of torture. It makes truth irrelevant. Under sufficient pain, the innocent confess to imaginary crimes and the guilty implicate innocent others. The system creates its own reality, manufactured through suffering. Too long without an answer, Dalton sighs. We begin. The heated device closes around your thumb. Initially, there's just pressure, uncomfortable, bearable. Then Dalton turns the screw a quarter rotation. The pressure increases sharply. Another turn. Now pain flares, bright and urgent. Your breath comes in gasps. Another turn. The bone creaks audibly. Sweat breaks out across your body. Another turn. You cry out, unable to contain it. The sound echoes off stone walls that have absorbed countless screams before yours. The names, Sir John demands, his voice cutting through your pain. Who conspired with you? In desperation, your mind races for something, anything to say. But before you can fabricate a confession, Dalton releases the pressure slightly. Just a taste, he says. We have hours yet. This, too, is calculated. By providing a moment of relief, he demonstrates his complete control over your suffering. The message is clear. Cooperation brings relief. Resistance brings escalation. In the tower, torture is not continuous. It comes in sessions, with periods of recovery in between. This isn't mercy, it's strategy. A prisoner allowed to heal partially can endure more sessions, providing more opportunities for questioning, and the anticipation of returning to the chamber becomes its own form of torment. Return our guest to their cell, Sir John commands. We'll continue tomorrow after they've had time to consider their position. The guards unchain you and half-drag your shaking body from the chamber. The thumbscrew has left your hand throbbing with pain, but no permanent damage has been done. Yet. That will come later if you continue to resist. Your cell is a small stone room with a straw pallet for sleeping and a bucket for waste. A tiny barred window, too small to escape through, provides your only connection to the outside world. Through it you can see a narrow slice of sky and hear the distant sounds of London, a cruel reminder of the normal life continuing beyond these walls. Food arrives, a bowl of thin gruel and a chunk of coarse bread. Medieval prison conditions are harsh by design. The tower doesn't provide comfort for its prisoners, only the minimum sustenance needed to keep them alive for questioning. As night falls, sleep eludes you. Your injured hand pulses with pain, and your mind is filled with images of what tomorrow might bring. This psychological torment, the dread of what's to come, is as much a part of the torture system as the physical pain itself. Morning arrives with no fanfare in your windowless cell. You have no way to mark time except for the meagre meals that appear at irregular intervals. This temporal disorientation is another weapon in the torturer's arsenal. The guards return and the journey back to the chamber begins again. Your legs tremble as you descend the stone stairs. Yesterday's session was merely an introduction. Today, you know, will be worse. The chamber appears unchanged, though something new has been prepared. A brazier with iron rods heating in the coals sits near the rack. These rods will be used to burn flesh, another lesser torture before the main devices are employed. Dalton greets you as if continuing a conversation barely interrupted. "I trust you've had time to reflect," he says. "Today we must progress unless you're ready to speak truthfully." Sir John stands in the same corner, watching with the same impassive expression. For him, this is routine governance. The tower's torture chamber is just one component of state security, no different in purpose than the soldiers guarding the city gates. "Before we begin," he says, "you should know that we've questioned your servants. They've told us interesting tales about mysterious visitors to your home, about letters burned after reading. This is another tactic, suggesting that evidence already exists, that denial is futile. Whether your servants have actually said anything is irrelevant. The suggestion alone plants doubt and fear. Today's session begins with the strappado. Your wrists are bound behind your back and connected to the rope. Slowly, the guards hoist you upward until your toes barely touch the ground. The pressure on your shoulders is immediate and intense. Then, with a nod from Dalton, they pull harder, lifting you completely off the floor. The pain is different from the thumb screw, less focused but more overwhelming. Your entire upper body becomes a center of agony as your shoulders strain against their natural range of motion. Breathing becomes difficult as your chest muscles stretch. "The names," Sir John repeats. "Give us the names and this ends." Silence brings consequences. Dalton signals, and the guards suddenly release the rope. You drop several inches before the rope goes taut again, sending a shocking jolt through your already stressed shoulder joints. The sound that tears from your throat is barely human. This process, raising, dropping, questioning, continues until your shoulders dislocate with an audible pop. The pain is blinding, all-consuming. Many prisoners confess at this point, unable to endure further. But what happens to those who don't? History provides disturbing answers. Cuthbert Simpson, whose story you recalled earlier, endured the rack 3 times without surrendering names. Anne Askew, arrested for distributing Protestant texts during Henry VIII's reign, was so severely racked that she had to be carried to her execution on a chair, unable to walk. Both chose agony over betrayal. Could you show such extraordinary courage? Would principles or loyalty mean enough to endure such suffering? These questions have haunted torture chambers throughout history. After the strappado, you're lowered to the floor, shoulders dislocated and useless. The pain makes coherent thought nearly impossible, yet still the questioning continues. This can end, Sir John reminds you. Just tell us what we need to know. In this moment of extremity, the temptation to invent a confession is nearly overwhelming. Many did exactly that, crafting elaborate falsehoods to escape further torture. Yet such respite was often temporary. False confessions led to contradictions, which led to renewed questioning and more torture. The medieval justice system created a nightmarish logic trap. Innocent or guilty, once in the torture chamber, escape became nearly impossible. Confession brought execution for imaginary crimes. Resistance brought more torture until confession eventually followed. Realizing you remain silent despite your agony, Dalton prepares for the next phase. The rack awaits, the most feared device in the chamber. Known colloquially as the Duke of Exeter's daughter, it was introduced to England in 1420 specifically for interrogating political prisoners. Its purpose is simple and terrible: to stretch the human body beyond its limits. We've had men confess merely upon seeing this device, Dalton tells you. Others have endured it for hours before speaking. The choice is yours. The guards drag your limp form to the wooden frame. Despite your dislocated shoulders, they secure your wrists to one roller and your ankles to another. Even this positioning causes excruciating pain as your damaged joints are manipulated. Once more, Sir John says, the names of your fellow conspirators. The moment stretches. Every instinct screams to confess, to say anything that might end this nightmare. But what names could you give? Random acquaintances? Friends? Family? Such a confession would condemn innocent others to this same chamber. Your silence is met with a nod from Sir John. Dalton turns the lever 1 notch. The mechanism clicks. The ropes tighten. Your already damaged body stretches slightly, sending fresh waves of agony through your dislocated shoulders. Another turn of the lever. The ratchet clicks again. The sound echoes in the chamber. A small noise that signals immense suffering. Your body stretches further. Joints already dislocated are pulled wider apart. Muscles tear. Ligaments strain. The human body has natural limits. On the rack, these limits are deliberately exceeded. Each click of the ratchet takes you further into territory the body is not designed to endure. This is the moment where many broke. The combination of present agony and the certainty of worse to come overwhelmed even the strongest resolve. Faced with the rack, people confess to impossible crimes, consorting with devils, flying through the air, changing into animals. Under such pain, fantasy and reality blur beyond recognition. Listen carefully, Sir John says, his voice penetrating the haze of your suffering. Bishop Bonner arrives tomorrow. He has special methods for stubborn cases like yours. The name sends a chill through you despite your pain. Bishop Edmund Bonner, the Devil's Dancing Bear, is notorious even in this era of routine cruelty. Under Queen Mary the Firm, he will torture hundreds of Protestants with sadistic creativity. Unlike the professional Dalton, Bonner takes personal pleasure in breaking his victims. One night to decide, Sir John continues. Confession tomorrow or Bishop Bonner's attentions. Consider carefully. The session ends. You're released from the rack, your body now a landscape of injury. The guards return you to your cell, where you collapse onto the straw pallet. Every movement an exercise in agony. Night falls again. In your cell, pain makes sleep impossible. Your dislocated shoulders throb, and the stretched muscles of your entire body scream with every slight movement. The mention of Bishop Bonner replays in your mind, along with stories you've heard of his cruelty. Medieval torture was not merely physical. The isolation, the uncertainty, the deliberate manipulation of hope and fear, all were weapons used against the prisoner's mind. Many broke psychologically before their bodies gave out. In the darkness of your cell, a strange thing happens. A figure appears, a monk in a simple brown robe. He offers water, then gently helps you sit up despite your injuries. "I am Brother Thomas," he says softly. "I serve as physician to the tower's prisoners." This, too, is part of the system. Medical care for torture victims wasn't humanitarian. It was practical. Dead prisoners told no secrets. A prisoner who died under questioning was a failure of the process. Brother Thomas examines your injuries with practiced hands. He manipulates your dislocated shoulders, popping them back into their sockets with sudden movements that draw gasps of pain from you. Then he applies salves to your wounds and binds your damaged joints. "These will heal," he says, "if given time." But time is the one thing you don't have. Tomorrow brings either confession or Bishop Bonner. Neither promises healing. As he works, Brother Thomas speaks quietly about his role in this grim place. He has treated hundreds of prisoners over the years, easing their suffering enough to ensure they survive for more questioning. His position is morally complex, a healer who enables further torture by keeping victims alive. "I've seen stronger than you break," he tells you without judgment. There's no shame in ending this. Is he offering compassionate advice or serving as another tool of coercion? In the torture chamber, even kindness becomes suspect. Every interaction is potentially manipulation designed to wear down resistance. Before leaving, Brother Thomas offers one last piece of information, whether as warning or mercy is unclear. Bishop Bonner brings his own devices, he says, things even Master Dalton considers excessive. His favourite is the burning chair, an iron seat heated from below while the victim is questioned. With these chilling words, he departs, leaving you alone with your pain and the terrible choice that awaits in the morning. Dawn comes too quickly. The cell door opens and the guards appear. But instead of taking you directly to the chamber, they bring you to a small room where water for washing and fresh clothing wait. Sir John wishes you presented properly to the bishop, one explains. This unexpected courtesy is more frightening than immediate return to the chamber. It suggests something ceremonial about the coming encounter, something worthy of preparation. Cleaned and dressed, you're led not to the underground chamber, but to a larger room on the ground floor of the White Tower. Windows here admit actual daylight, your first glimpse of the sun since entering the tower. The room contains a large table surrounded by chairs. It looks almost like a council chamber rather than a torture room. But the illusion of civility is shattered by what stands in the corner, an iron chair with straps for arms and legs positioned over a compartment clearly designed to hold hot coals. 3 men await. Sir John you recognise. Beside him stands a heavy-set man in bishop's robes, Edmund Bonner himself, his fleshy face set in an expression of amused contempt. The third man is a royal clerk, quill and parchment ready to record whatever transpires. "Our guest arrives," Bonner says, his voice surprisingly soft for a man of his reputation. "I've heard much about your stubborn character." Unlike Dalton's professional detachment, Bonner's manner suggests personal interest in your suffering. His eyes evaluate you like a craftsman assessing raw material, calculating what methods might work best to break you. "Before we begin with my special methods," he says, gesturing to the iron chair, "I'll offer what Sir John and Master Dalton have already proposed. Confess your treason, name your accomplices, and your punishment will be merciful, a quick execution rather than what I have planned." The torture chambers of medieval Europe operated on a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. They recognized that the anticipation of pain can be as effective as pain itself. By displaying instruments, explaining procedures, and offering alternatives, they created a mental framework where confession seemed not just inevitable but desirable. This was the true power of the torture chamber, not just the physical agony it inflicted, but the way it reconstructed reality for its victims. Within its walls, innocence became an unaffordable luxury. Truth became whatever stopped the pain. Principles and loyalty dissolved against the immediate necessity of relief. As you stand before Bishop Bonner facing the terrible choice between false confession and unendurable suffering, you understand why the medieval torture chamber was so feared. Its true horror lay not in its devices, but in its inexorable logic, a system that left no room for human dignity or objective truth. And as the bishop gestures toward the waiting chair, its metal already beginning to glow from the coals beneath, you realize that few indeed would last even a single day in such a place. Not because of physical weakness, but because to endure meant sacrificing either truth or self in ways that tore at the very foundations of human identity. The iron chair awaits, its surface radiating heat you can feel from several paces away. The decision that faces you, confession or resistance, is one that countless prisoners confronted throughout the medieval period. Some chose truth and suffered accordingly. Others chose relief and carried the moral burden of false confession and the betrayal of innocence. There are no simple heroes or villains in this darkest corner of medieval justice. Only human beings caught in a system that stripped away everything except the capacity for pain and the desperate desire to escape it. Bishop Bonner circles you like a predator assessing its prey. Unlike Master Dalton, whose actions were clinical and detached, Bonner radiates a disturbing enthusiasm for what's to come. His fleshy fingers tap impatiently against his robes as he waits for your decision. "I grow weary of waiting," Bonner says finally. "Perhaps a small demonstration will help clarify your position." He nods to a guard who brings forward a metal implement from the brazier, a branding iron in the shape of a heretic's fork. The device is simple but effective, a two-pronged fork designed to be placed under the chin, with the other end against the chest. It prevents the victim from lowering their head, forcing them to maintain an exhausting upright position. "This is merely a taste," Bonner explains. "In Spain, they have perfected methods that make our English techniques seem quite merciful by comparison." The Spanish Inquisition, represents the most systematic application of torture in medieval Europe. Established in 1478, it operates with terrifying efficiency. While Bishop Bonner might take sadistic pleasure in breaking individuals, the Spanish Inquisitors have developed torture into an administrative process, complete with scribes, protocols, and careful record-keeping. The mention of Spain diverts Bonner into what seems almost like a scholarly discourse. Despite his fearsome reputation, he is also a man of learning, educated at Oxford. This strange combination, the scholar and the torturer, is not uncommon in medieval Europe, where intellectual sophistication and extreme cruelty often coexist. The Spanish method begins with what they call the question, Bonner explains, warming to his subject. The accused is first shown the torture chamber and its devices. Many confess merely at this sight. Those who don't are stripped naked. The vulnerability of nudity being itself a form of torment. As he speaks, the guards begin preparing the iron chair, adding more coals to the compartment beneath. The metal glows an ominous dull red. The heat radiating from it is palpable, even from where you stand. If the sight of instruments fails to loosen the tongue, Bonner continues, they proceed to the strappado, much like what you've already experienced. But the Spanish version adds refinements, weights attached to the feet, and sudden drops that shatter the shoulders more effectively. His casual description of such suffering reveals much about medieval attitudes toward pain. Physical agony was not hidden away or minimized. It was a public, acknowledged part of justice. The torturer's craft was discussed with the same professional interest as masonry or shipbuilding. Their water torture is particularly effective, Bonner adds with disturbing admiration. The victim is bound to an inclined rack. Head lowered, a cloth is placed over the mouth and nose, and water is slowly poured onto it. The sensation is of drowning, though no actual harm occurs. Most break quickly under this method. What Bonner is describing, what we now call waterboarding, would continue as a torture technique for centuries to come. The persistence of such methods across time reveals something unsettling about human nature and the willingness to inflict suffering in the name of security, justice, or truth. Enough talk, Sir John interrupts, clearly less enthralled by the academic discussion of torture techniques. Will you confess your treason now, or must we proceed? You look from Bonner to the glowing chair and back again. The question hanging in the air is not just about your guilt or innocence. It's about what kind of person you are. Will you sacrifice truth to escape pain? Will you implicate innocent others to save yourself? These moral calculations faced countless prisoners throughout the medieval period. Outside the tower's thick walls, London carries on oblivious to your plight. Markets bustle, apprentices learn trades, children play in narrow streets. The normality of life continues in parallel with the chamber's horrors. This separation between the public world and the hidden machinery of power is crucial to understanding medieval torture. Society functions because most people never see what happens in these shadowy rooms. I am innocent, you say again, voice cracking with fear, despite your resolve. I have committed no treason. Bonner sighs, as if disappointed by your lack of cooperation. Very well, he says. The chair awaits. The guards move to seize you, but before they can reach you, the door to the chamber opens. A messenger enters and whispers urgently to Sir John, whose expression changes from irritation to concern. Prepare the prisoner for transport, he orders suddenly. We depart for Hampton Court immediately. The king wishes to question this one personally. This unexpected development saves you from Bonner's immediate attentions, though whether it represents rescue or merely a change of venue for your suffering remains unclear. What is clear is Bonner's frustration at being denied his entertainment. Another time, perhaps, he says, his gaze promising future pain. You're escorted from the chamber, not back to your cell, but to the tower's courtyard, where a covered wagon waits. The journey to Hampton Court Palace will take several hours. A reprieve of sorts, though the ultimate destination may hold its own terrors. As the wagon rumbles through London's streets, you glimpse ordinary life through the canvas covering. Merchants shouting their wares, children running between carts, women carrying baskets of produce. This world seems impossibly distant now, separated from you by more than physical space. The experience of the torture chamber creates a chasm between its victims and normal society. The road leads southwest along the Thames through villages and fields. Inside the wagon, guards watch you impassively. Your injuries from previous torture sessions throb with each bump and jolt of the journey. The dislocated shoulders that Brother Thomas reset ache constantly, and your fingers remain swollen from the thumb screws. This physical suffering was a common experience for medieval prisoners. Medical care existed primarily to keep them alive for further questioning, not to ease their pain. Records from the period speak of prisoners whose bodies bore permanent marks of their ordeal, twisted limbs, missing fingers, scarred flesh. Those who survived torture often carried its evidence for life. As the wagon travels, you drift in and out of consciousness, exhaustion finally overcoming pain. Dreams and reality blur together. Dalton's impassive face, Bonner's eager eyes, the mechanical click of the rack's ratchet. This psychological aftermath, the way torture inscribes itself on the mind, was as much a part of the process as physical pain. Hours later, you're jolted awake as the wagon stops. The canvas cover is pulled back, revealing Hampton Court Palace, a magnificent red brick complex begun by Cardinal Wolsey and expanded by King Henry VIII. In another century, it will become one of the most splendid royal residences in England. Now, in 1447, it is still primarily Wolsey's creation. Guards escort you into the palace through corridors decorated with tapestries and illuminated by ornate candle holders. The contrast with the tower's grim dungeons couldn't be more stark. Here, wealth and power display themselves openly in polished wood and gleaming metal. You're brought to a small but comfortable chamber. Not a cell, but a proper room with a bed, chair, and window overlooking the palace gardens. A servant brings water for washing and clean clothing. After days in the tower's squalor, these simple comforts seem almost unreal. A physician arrives to examine your injuries. Unlike Brother Thomas's rough ministrations, this man's care is gentle and thorough. He applies salves, binds wounds, and provides a tincture for pain. His manner suggests you're now a guest rather than a prisoner. "The king will see you tomorrow," he explains. "He wishes you well enough to speak clearly." This dramatic change in circumstances from torture chamber to royal audience would be disorienting for anyone. But in medieval justice, such reversals were not uncommon. Favour and disfavour could shift suddenly, depending on court politics or royal whim. Left alone in the chamber, you finally sleep properly for the first time since your arrest. When morning comes, you're provided with breakfast, not prison gruel, but bread, cheese, and ale. The servant who brings it offers no explanation for your changed status. Guards arrive mid-morning to escort you to the king's presence. Though no longer rough in their handling, they remain vigilant. You're led through more splendid corridors to a private audience chamber where King Henry VI awaits. Henry is not what you might expect. Just 26 years old, he has already ruled for 25 years, having become king as an infant. Thin and scholarly, he lacks the forceful presence of his warrior father, Henry V. Instead, he radiates a gentle, almost ethereal quality that some call saintliness and other weakness. The king sits in a carved chair beside a window. No courtiers are present. This is a private audience. He gestures for you to approach and studies your face with curious intensity. "You are accused of plotting against our person," he says finally, his voice soft but clear. "Yet we find no conviction in the accusations. Tell us truthfully. Have you conspired against your king?" There's something about his direct gaze that compels honesty. You repeat your innocence, explaining how political rivals might have manufactured the charges against you. Henry listens attentively, nodding occasionally. When you finish, he remains silent for several moments, his expression thoughtful. "We have seen too much cruelty done in our name," he says finally. "The Tower's methods trouble our conscience, though our advisers insist on their necessity." This admission offers a glimpse into the complex moral universe of medieval kingship. Even rulers who authorized torture could experience doubt about its righteousness. Henry VI, with his religious temperament, found the harsher aspects of governance particularly difficult. "We believe you innocent," the king continues, "and will order your release forthwith. But understand this mercy comes with expectation, your unwavering loyalty in these troubled times." With these words, your ordeal ends as suddenly as it began, from accused traitor to royal favourite in the space of days. Such dramatic reversals characterized the precarious world of medieval politics. As you leave the king's presence, still processing this unexpected reprieve, a courtier explains the true reason for your salvation. Your main accuser has himself been exposed as a traitor, confessing under torture to fabricating evidence against numerous innocent parties, including you. The irony is bitter. The same torture system that nearly destroyed you has ultimately saved you, but only after subjecting you to undeserved suffering. And somewhere in the Tower, other innocent people continue to endure what you escaped. This pattern repeats throughout medieval history. Torture produces both false confessions and occasional truths in proportions impossible to determine. The system perpetuates itself through this ambiguity. Each genuine conspiracy uncovered justifies countless unjust accusations. Your release comes with restoration of property and position. Within days, you're back in London society as if nothing had happened, but everything has changed. Your body bears the marks of the Tower's attentions. More significantly, your mind carries memories that separate you from those who have never experienced the Chamber's horrors. This psychological distance, the gulf between those who have endured torture and those who haven't, persists across centuries. From medieval chambers to modern sites of detention, the experience of systematic pain creates a kind of knowledge that cannot be shared through words alone. Some survivors of medieval torture turned to religion for solace. Others sought revenge against their tormentors. Many simply tried to forget, though nightmares and sudden terrors often made this impossible. The body might heal, but the mind retained every detail of the ordeal. You find yourself unable to pass the Tower without trembling. The sight of any uniform resembling those worn by the yeoman warders causes your heart to race. Certain sounds, the clank of metal, the creak of wood under strain, trigger vivid flashbacks to the chamber. What you're experiencing, this persistent reliving of trauma, would not be formally recognized or treated for centuries. Medieval society had no concept of psychological injury separate from physical harm or spiritual affliction. Those suffering from what we now call post-traumatic stress are often considered melancholic or possessed. As weeks pass, you begin to understand that your experience in the Tower has changed you permanently, not just in the lingering pain of injured joints or the nightmares that disturb your sleep, but in how you view authority, justice, and human nature itself. This transformation from innocent civilian to torture survivor repeated itself countless times throughout the medieval period. In England alone, hundreds passed through the Tower's chambers under the Tudors. In Spain, the Inquisition processed thousands. Across Europe, local authorities employed torture as a standard investigative tool for serious crimes. The specific methods varied by region and period. In Germany, the strappado was most common. In France, the brodequins, wooden boards tightened around the legs until bones shattered, gained favour. Spain refined water torture to an art form. England specialised in stretching techniques like the rack. Despite these regional variations, the fundamental logic remained constant. Physical pain would extract truth. This assumption persisted despite ample evidence that torture produced whatever confession the torturer sought, true or false. Bishop Bonner, whose attentions you narrowly escaped, continued his career under Queen Mary Tudor, earning his nickname the Devil's Dancing Bear through his enthusiastic persecution of Protestants. Historical records credit him with personally torturing and condemning dozens during Mary's brief reign. Bonner's methods combined psychological manipulation with physical agony. He often began by treating prisoners with unexpected kindness, offering food, comfort, and reasoned theological discussion. Only when this approach failed would he reveal his true nature, transitioning to increasingly severe tortures. This good cop, bad cop routine, centuries before the term existed, proved remarkably effective. The contrast between initial kindness and subsequent cruelty disoriented victims, making resistance more difficult. Many broke under this psychological whiplash even before serious physical torture began. Bonner's career illustrates how torture in medieval Europe wasn't simply about inflicting pain, it was a sophisticated system combining psychological manipulation, social isolation, sensory deprivation, and physical suffering, all aimed at breaking the individual's will. The medieval torture chamber thus represents not just cruelty but a developed understanding of human psychology. Its practitioners knew that fear often exceeds pain in effectiveness. They recognized that anticipation multiplies suffering. They understood how to leverage social isolation and sensory manipulation to weaken resistance. This sophisticated psychological dimension separates medieval European torture from simpler punitive violence in other historical contexts. The chamber wasn't just a place where pain was inflicted, it was a carefully designed environment where every element, from architecture to procedures, nom nomu som server, served the goal of breaking human resistance. As you rebuild your life after the tower, you discover that society offers little sympathy for torture survivors. Those who haven't experienced it cannot comprehend it. Those who approve of the system see no reason to question its effects. Those who might sympathize fear association with someone once accused of treason, even if later exonerated. This social isolation, the inability to share or process traumatic experience, compounded the psychological damage of torture itself. Without community support or formal therapeutic approaches, survivors largely suffered in silence, their invisible wounds as lasting as their physical scars. Months after your release, you encounter a former tower guard in a London tavern. He doesn't recognize you. To him, prisoners were interchangeable bodies, not individual humans. You watch him drink and laugh, apparently unburdened by his participation in systematic cruelty. This, too, is part of how torture persisted in medieval society. Those who administered it compartmentalized their actions, separating professional duty from moral responsibility. Few torturers considered themselves evil. Most viewed their work as necessary service to crown and country. The experience of narrowly escaping Bishop Bonner's attentions follows you through life. Dreams of the iron chair, heated to glowing, recur for years. The smell of hot metal triggers immediate panic. Certain rooms, particularly stone chambers with low ceilings, become impossible to enter. These reactions, which we now recognise as symptoms of trauma, had no name in medieval England. They were simply the expected aftermath of the tower's attentions, the invisible price paid by those who survived its chambers. Your story, from false accusation through torture to unexpected reprieve, captures elements common to many who experienced medieval justice. The arbitrariness, the physical suffering, the psychological manipulation, and the permanent aftermath compose a pattern repeated throughout the period. What separates medieval torture from modern understandings isn't primarily the methods used, many techniques survive to this day, but the social acceptance that surrounded them. Torture wasn't hidden or denied. It was an acknowledged, regulated part of the justice system, complete with rules, procedures, and official positions. This institutional nature made medieval torture particularly insidious. Operating openly under royal authority, administered by professionals following established protocols, it carried a legitimacy that isolated instances of cruelty could never achieve. As you trace the raised scars on your thumbs, permanent souvenirs of Dalton's attentions, you understand something that few of your contemporaries grasp. The distance between civilization and barbarism is far narrower than most imagine. Normal, decent people can participate in terrible systems. Sophisticated societies can incorporate methodical cruelty. The capacity for sanctioned suffering lies just beneath the surface of ordered community. Years pass after your experience in the Tower of London. Life returns to a semblance of normality, though the memories never truly fade. Then, in 1455, England descends into civil war, the conflict later called the Wars of the Roses. As political fortunes shift violently, you decide that England has become too dangerous. Like many merchants and scholars fleeing the conflict, you make your way to the European continent. Your travels take you first to the German lands, not yet a unified country, but a patchwork of independent cities, principalities, and ecclesiastical territories within the Holy Roman Empire. Here, far from the Tower of London, you discover that the art of torture has taken different forms, reflecting local legal traditions and cultural practices. In Nuremberg, one of the great imperial cities, you encounter a justice system both similar to and different from England's. Like England, Nuremberg employs torture as an investigative tool. Unlike England, where torture remains primarily a tool of state security used against political prisoners, German cities apply it more broadly to ordinary criminal cases. The German approach to torture is systematized under what scholars call the Carolina Code, the criminal law of Emperor Charles V, formally issued in 1532, but already influential in legal practice. This code establishes specific guidelines for when and how torture may be applied, creating a framework that both enables and constrains judicial cruelty. Under the Carolina Code, torture requires substantial preliminary evidence, not just accusation. Multiple eyewitnesses, physical evidence, or a documented history of similar crimes must exist before torture can be authorized. These requirements, though often honored in the breach, represent an attempt to limit arbitrary application. In Nuremberg's town hall, you're granted permission to observe a criminal proceeding, not the torture itself, which remains private, but the judicial process surrounding it. A local official explains the graduated system of torture used in German lands. We begin with territio verbalis, verbal intimidation, he explains. The accused is described in vivid detail what awaits them if they don't confess. Many confess at this stage, requiring no physical methods. This psychological dimension, using fear as a precursor to actual pain, appears throughout European torture systems. The mind's ability to anticipate suffering often proves more effective than suffering itself. If verbal intimidation fails, the official continues, we proceed to territio realis, showing the instruments of torture and demonstrating their use. The accused is brought to the chamber and watches as the devices are prepared. This staged demonstration, a theatrical performance of impending pain, constitutes a crucial phase in German judicial torture. Court records show that significant numbers of accused confessed during this demonstration phase before experiencing actual physical torture. Only if these preliminary measures fail do we proceed to the question ordinaire, actual physical torture, the official concludes. And even then, we follow strict protocols regarding duration, intensity, and medical supervision. These protocols reveal the paradoxical nature of medieval torture, a system that inflicts extreme suffering while simultaneously attempting to regulate that suffering through bureaucratic rules. The tension between cruelty and constraint defines judicial torture throughout its history. In Nuremberg, you visit the underground chambers beneath the town hall where torture is conducted. Unlike the tower's stone simplicity, the Nuremberg torture chamber is almost clinically equipped. Various specialized devices line the walls, each designed for particular effects. The German territories have developed their own characteristic instruments. The most infamous is the pear of anguish, a pear-shaped metal device inserted into bodily orifices and then expanded by turning a screw mechanism. The knee splitter uses pointed spikes to crush the knee joint between wooden plates. The breast ripper, used primarily on women accused of adultery or abortion, tears flesh with heated metal claws. What strikes you about the German approach is its methodical nature. Torture here isn't just systematic in application, but in design. Each device engineered for specific effects, calibrated to produce maximum pain without necessarily causing death. This reflects a broader German cultural emphasis on technical precision and craftsmanship, applied disturbingly to the production of suffering. From Germany, your travels take you to France, where torture has developed yet another regional character. Here, under the system judiciaire of royal courts, torture functions as part of an inquisitorial legal process distinct from both English and German approaches. In Paris, you learn about the brodequins, wooden boards placed around the legs and tightened with cords until bones shatter. You hear of the estrapade, the French version of the strappado, with national refinements including weights attached to the victim's feet and periodic dousing with cold water to maintain consciousness during extended sessions. The French have systematized torture differently than their German neighbors. Where German practice emphasizes graduated intensity, French procedures focus on duration and repetition. Extended questioning over multiple sessions, with carefully limited physical pain in each, characterizes the French approach. A French legal scholar explains the rationale. Constant moderate pain with little hope of relief breaks resistance more effectively than brief extreme agony. The mind surrenders when it recognizes that suffering will continue indefinitely. This insight that hopelessness often proves more devastating than pain itself informs the French torture system. By carefully managing physical suffering to permit extended application, French authorities create a psychological environment where resistance seems futile. Your European travels give you perspective on how torture varies by region while maintaining certain constants. Everywhere, it serves both punitive and investigative functions. Everywhere, it combines physical and psychological elements. Everywhere, it operates within a framework of rules and procedures that create an illusion of judicial propriety. Most significantly, everywhere torture exists, it creates the same fundamental problem, the impossibility of distinguishing true confessions from false ones. Whether in England, Germany, France, or elsewhere, torture produces the information the torturers seek, whether that information corresponds to reality or not. This inherent unreliability raises an important question. If torture so frequently produces false confessions, Why did medieval European societies continue to employ it? The answer reveals much about medieval conceptions of truth, body, and pain. Medieval legal theory held that physical suffering had a special relationship to truth. Pain was believed to strip away deception, reaching a person's authentic core. This belief stemmed partly from religious concepts, particularly the idea that suffering purifies the soul, and partly from practical observation of how people under torture eventually say whatever will make the pain stop. This theological dimension of torture appears most clearly in the practices of the Spanish Inquisition, which you learn about through travelers' accounts. Established in 1478, the Inquisition employs torture as a means of purification, not just information extraction. Pain becomes a pathway to spiritual cleansing, with confession representing not just admission of guilt, but the first step toward redemption. What makes the Inquisition particularly effective isn't necessarily greater cruelty in methods. They use largely the same techniques as secular courts, but rather the comprehensive nature of their approach. Combining spiritual authority with judicial power, they leverage both physical fear and fear for one's immortal soul. An Italian merchant who survived inquisitorial questioning describes the psychological tactics. They speak first of God's mercy, then of your crimes against him. They offer spiritual counsel before showing instruments of pain. This mingling of pastoral care and threat confuses the mind until one no longer knows if they seek to save your soul or destroy your body. This integration of spiritual and physical coercion represents the Inquisition's innovation. By positioning torture as potentially redemptive suffering, they transform resistance from heroic endurance into spiritual obstinacy, a sin compounding the original heresy. Beyond these regional variations, your travels reveal something more fundamental about medieval torture. Its social function extends beyond individual cases. Public knowledge of torture's existence, even without witnessing it directly, creates a climate of compliance and self-regulation. In medieval society, most people never experienced the torture chamber firsthand, but everyone knew it existed. They heard descriptions, saw the scars on survivors, witnessed the public punishments that followed confessions. This awareness alone shaped behavior, discouraging actions that might lead to accusation. A French historian explains this dynamic. The chamber's power extends beyond its walls. People monitor their own words and actions, knowing what awaits those who draw official attention. The torture chamber disciplines society without needing to torture everyone. This concept that torture functioned as a broader system of social control through fear helps explain why medieval authorities maintained it despite its unreliability for extracting truth. The actual truth of individual confessions mattered less than the generalizing effect of fearful compliance. As you continue your European journey, eventually reaching Venice in northern Italy, you encounter a particularly sophisticated application of this principle. The Venetian Republic, known for its complex governmental structures, has developed torture into an administrative science. In the Doge's palace, the seat of Venetian government, torture chambers are physically incorporated into the architecture of governance. The infamous pozzi, wells, and piombi, leads, dungeon cells located below water level and in the scorching attics respectively, create environmental torture through extreme conditions before physical methods are applied. A Venetian official explains their approach with disturbing candor. Most never require the actual instruments. The pozzi alone, with their darkness and damp, confuse the mind. The piombi, where summer heat becomes unbearable, exhaust resistance. By the time questioning begins, most are prepared to speak without further persuasion. This environment-based approach, using architecture itself as a torture device, represents a refinement beyond direct physical methods. By creating conditions that deteriorate mental state and physical health over time, Venetian authorities achieve compliance without the messiness of extreme bodily damage. Throughout your European travels, certain constants emerge despite regional variations. Torture chambers are typically located underground, utilizing the psychological impact of descent and isolation. They operate in secrecy, though their existence is publicly acknowledged. They employ both specialized instruments and ordinary objects, repurposed for causing pain. Most importantly, everywhere torture exists, it creates the same moral compromises in those who administer it. In taverns across Europe, you observe executioners and interrogators, men whose daily work involves inflicting extreme suffering on others. Some drink heavily, others develop dark humor about their profession. Many live in social isolation, their necessary but tainted role keeping them at society's margins. A retired German executioner, loosened by wine, confides, "We are society's necessary sin. They need what we do, but pretend not to see us doing it. We make possible their illusion of justice without barbarism." This moral contradiction, the existence of formalized cruelty within supposedly civilized societies, represents the central paradox of medieval torture. By delegating cruelty to specialized practitioners operating under official authority, medieval communities maintain collective deniability while benefiting from torture's effects. After years abroad, circumstances allow your return to England, where the Wars of the Roses have finally concluded with the Tudor dynasty taking the throne. You find London transformed in some ways, but unchanged in others. The Tower still stands, its torture chambers still operational, though now serving Tudor rather than Lancastrian interests. Your own experience there feels simultaneously immediate and distant, a wound that has scarred over but still aches when pressed. You avoid paths that would take you within sight of the tower's walls. You sleep with a candle lit to ward off dreams of darkened stone chambers. This lifelong aftermath, the permanent psychological imprint of the torture chamber, represents torture's most lasting effect. Beyond information extracted or confessions secured, torture forever alters those who experience it. The body may heal, but the mind retains a special knowledge of human vulnerability that cannot be unlearned. A physician who treats former prisoners explains, "The chamber changes how they inhabit their bodies. Ordinary sensations, cold stone, tight clothing, darkness, trigger memories of helplessness. The world becomes potentially threatening in ways others cannot understand." This description aligns perfectly with your own experience. Certain sensations, the creak of a wooden chair, the smell of damp stone, the clank of metal on metal, instantly transport you back to the tower, triggering physical reactions of fear and helplessness. These reactions have diminished with time but never disappeared completely. Your European travels have shown you that torture, while varying in specific methods, creates similar effects everywhere. Whether in English, German, French, Spanish or Italian chambers, the fundamental experience combines physical pain, psychological manipulation and social isolation to break the individual will. This underlying similarity suggests something disturbing about human nature and social organization, that despite cultural differences, societies consistently develop systematic cruelty when it serves power. The particulars may vary, but the fundamental dynamics remain constant across borders and cultures. As you settle into the last chapter of your life in Tudor England, you occasionally hear stories of the Tower's continued use. Under Henry VIII, political and religious prisoners face the same chambers you experienced decades earlier. Anne Askew, John Frith, Thomas More, names that will enter history as the Tudor religious controversies claim their victims. These continuities across time, the persistent use of torture despite changes in regime, religion, and social conditions, reveal its institutional nature. Torture persists not because of individual cruelty, but because it serves structural purposes within systems of power and control. This insight that cruelty can be systemic rather than merely personal represents perhaps the most important understanding gained from your journey through Europe's torture chambers. The horror lies not just in specific instruments or techniques, but in the bureaucratic normalization of suffering, the transformation of pain into procedure. In your final years, you occasionally share your story with trusted friends. Some listen with sympathy, others with discomfort or disbelief. Most struggle to comprehend how systematic cruelty could coexist with the religious and civic values medieval society claimed to uphold. This cognitive dissonance, the gap between proclaimed values and actual practices, defined the place of torture in medieval Europe. Communities simultaneously maintained contradictory beliefs that justice required humane treatment and that torture was necessary for security and truth. This contradiction persisted because most people never had to directly confront it, experiencing torture only as a distant reality affecting others. Your own experience has stripped away this comfortable distance. Having felt the thumbscrew's pressure and the rack's tension, you cannot maintain the fiction that torture happens only to the guilty or that it reliably produces truth. You know firsthand how easily innocent flesh breaks under sufficient pain. This knowledge, the lived reality of the torture chamber rather than its sanitized legal theory, represents a perspective few in medieval society possessed. Most people, including those who authorized and administered torture, maintained comforting illusions about its justice and necessity. Your journey through Europe's varying torture systems has revealed a fundamental truth that despite regional differences in methods and procedures, torture everywhere serves the same essential functions, extracting confessions regardless of truth, punishing through process rather than just outcome, and creating broader social compliance through exemplary fear. This understanding places your personal experience within a larger historical pattern, not an isolated trauma, but one instance of a widespread practice that shaped medieval concepts of truth, body, justice, and power throughout Europe. As night falls on your final evening of reminiscence, you reflect on how the memory of the torture chamber has both haunted and instructed you. It has shown you human fragility, how easily bodies and wills break under systematic pressure. It has revealed institutional cruelty's mechanics, how suffering becomes routinized through procedures and roles. Most importantly, it has demonstrated how civilized societies accommodate practices that contradict their stated values through compartmentalization and distancing. These insights, gained at terrible personal cost, constitute a form of knowledge unavailable to those who never entered the chamber. They explain why you wouldn't last a day in a medieval torture chamber, not because of physical weakness, but because no one could. The system was designed precisely to overcome human endurance through calculated application of physical and psychological pressure. The true horror of medieval torture lies not in the extremity of any single method, but in the systematic application of psychology, technology, and social authority to break human resistance. Against this combined force, individual will, no matter how strong, ultimately proves insufficient. As your life draws to its natural close in Tudor England, you've witnessed the transition from medieval to early modern society. Having survived the Tower's chambers and travelled throughout Europe's varying systems of judicial torture, you possess a perspective few others share. A lived understanding of how physical suffering became institutionalized within systems of justice. Now, In your final days, you find yourself reflecting on what this dark knowledge means. Your grandchildren sit at your bedside, eager for stories of your merchant adventures across Europe. But there are some stories you never share with them. The memories of the tower's dungeons, the sight of Bonner's heated implements, the sounds that echo still in your dreams. Grandfather, your eldest grandchild asks one evening, is it true that criminals are tortured in the tower? My friend said his father told him terrible things happen there. The question catches you off guard. How do you explain such darkness to a child? Yet you recognize the importance of truth, even uncomfortable truth, in understanding the world they will inherit. Yes, you answer carefully. But it's important to understand why such things exist, not just that they do. And so begins your final lesson, an explanation not just of torture's mechanics, but its meaning within society. You share with them, in terms gentle enough for young ears, what your experience has taught you about how civilized societies accommodate practices that seem to contradict their values. The tower's chambers, you explain, tell us something important about how people think about truth and pain. For centuries, people believed that extreme suffering could reveal hidden truths, that the body under duress would surrender secrets the mind tried to keep. Your grandchildren listen with solemn attention as you continue. This belief persists despite evidence to the contrary, that people in enough pain will say whatever stops that pain, true or not. This contradiction reveals how desperately societies want simple methods for determining truth, even when such methods fail. This insight that torture persists, not because it works, but because societies want it to work, represents one of the most important understandings gained from your life's experience. The torture chamber exists as much as a symbolic space as a physical one, a place where the comforting fiction of accessible truth is maintained through institutionalized suffering. But why would the king allow such things? Your granddaughter asks, her young mind still operating in the simple moral framework of childhood. The question cuts to the heart of political authority in medieval and early modern Europe. How do you explain to a child that authority often requires violence, or at least the threat of it, to maintain itself? Kings and queens, you say carefully, believe they must protect their realms from dangers both outside and within. The tower's chambers represent one way they try to uncover those dangers. Whether this way is effective or just is a question each person must consider for themselves. This diplomatic answer satisfies the children, though you know the full reality is more complex. Royal authority throughout medieval Europe depended on monopolizing legitimate violence, distinguishing between criminal cruelty and sanctioned force. Torture represents the most extreme expression of this distinction, transforming what would otherwise be criminal assault into official procedure. As you speak with your grandchildren, you realize you're providing them a perspective few of their generation will receive, an understanding of torture informed not by legal theory or popular rumor, but by direct experience. This knowledge, painful as it was to acquire, has value in helping future generations understand the complexities of justice and cruelty. Remember, you tell them, that what happens in those chambers affects not just those inside, but everyone who knows they exist. The tower's dungeons shape how people throughout England think and act, making them careful of what they say and do, even when they've committed no crime. This insight that torture functions as social control beyond its immediate victims represents one of the most sophisticated understandings you've developed through your experiences. The chamber's power extends far beyond its walls, creating a society disciplined by the possibility of extreme suffering. After your grandchildren leave, your mind drifts to the broader historical context your life has spanned. Born under the Lancastrians, survived the Wars of the Roses, and now witnessing the Tudor consolidation of power, you've seen how torture adapted to changing political circumstances while maintaining its essential functions. Under Henry VIII, the Tower's chambers have found new purpose in religious persecution rather than just political security. Anne Askew, whose story you've heard, endured the rack so severely that her shoulders and hips dislocated, rendering her unable to walk to her own execution. She was carried to the stake in a chair, her body broken but her will intact. She never provided the names of fellow Protestants her torturers sought. Stories like Askew's demonstrate an important truth about torture that contradicts its theoretical justification. Those with strongest principles often resist longest, while the innocent or peripherally involved break quickly. This paradox that torture is least effective against exactly the dedicated conspirators it supposedly targets represents one of the system's fundamental contradictions. In your dreams that night, you find yourself back in the Tower's underground chamber, but this time you're not the prisoner, but an observer watching the procession of history's victims, from forgotten medieval peasants to famous Tudor nobility, each enduring the same fundamental experience despite different historical circumstances. This dream vision continues across centuries you will never see. You witness torture's gradual evolution and eventual official abandonment. You see the growing legal restrictions in the 17th century as judges increasingly question torture's reliability and morality. You watch as public opinion slowly shifts, with Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Beccaria condemning torture as both ineffective and immoral. By the late 18th century, most European states have officially abolished judicial torture. Prussia abandons it in 1740, France in 1780, and other nations follow. Yet even in your dream vision, you notice how abolition on paper doesn't always mean elimination in practice. Unofficial torture continues in many places, hidden from public view but serving the same fundamental purposes. The vision carries you further still to archaeological discoveries centuries after your time. You watch as modern researchers uncover physical evidence of medieval torture chambers, the iron fittings where racks were anchored, the drainage channels for water torture, the hook points for strappado ropes. These material remains provide tangible connection between past and future, confirming what written records sometimes obscure. In Oxford, archaeologists find a medieval prison with specialized restraint mechanisms. In German castle dungeons, they discover implements preserved by dry conditions. In Spanish administrative buildings, they unearth the chambers where the Inquisition conducted its questioning. These discoveries reveal the physical infrastructure that supported judicial torture, the technological aspects often overlooked in historical accounts focused on legal theory. Modern scientists in your vision study the physical effects of historical torture methods. They confirm what you learned through experience, that techniques like the strappado indeed dislocate shoulders when applied as described in medieval manuals, that the rack does separate joints when operated according to historical accounts, that water torture does create the sensation of drowning without necessarily causing death. These scientific confirmations validate the historical record that future generations might otherwise dismiss as exaggeration. They provide material evidence for experiences that many would prefer to consider impossible, that human ingenuity has indeed been applied systematically to causing maximal pain without death. Most importantly, your dream vision shows you how future generations will understand medieval torture in psychological terms unavailable in your time. Concepts like trauma, post-traumatic stress, and psychological torture become recognized as equally significant as physical methods. The effects you experienced but couldn't name, the flashbacks, the nightmares, the triggered responses to certain stimuli, in scientific recognition and explanation. This psychological understanding represents perhaps the most important evolution in how torture is conceptualized. Where medieval theory focused almost exclusively on the body as the site of truth extraction, future generations recognize the mind as equally, if not more significant, both in terms of torture's methods and its lasting effects. You awaken from this strange, prophetic dream with a sense of historical perspective impossible in waking life. Your individual experience, terrible as it was, forms one thread in a tapestry spanning centuries, from ancient practices through medieval refinement to eventual official rejection, but continued clandestine use. This historical perspective offers cold comfort but important context. The suffering you endured wasn't senseless or isolated, but part of long-standing institutional practices that would eventually face questioning and reform. This doesn't minimize individual pain, but places it within broader patterns of social evolution. The next morning, still contemplating your dream vision, you decide to record your experiences and reflections, not for immediate publication, but for future generations who might benefit from first-hand testimony, using paper that has become more affordable under the Tudors. You begin writing your account of the tower's chambers and your subsequent European observations. This act of documentation itself represents an important historical process. Most torture victims throughout medieval history left no records of their experiences. Their suffering is known only through official documents created by the very authorities who authorized their torment. These bureaucratic records, torture warrants, interrogation transcripts, confessions, tell partial stories at best, omitting the lived reality of the chamber. Your account, combining personal experience with comparative observations across Europe, offers something rare in historical records, a victim's perspective on institutionalized suffering. Though you have no way of knowing whether your writings will survive for future readers, the act of creating them feels important, a testimony against forgetting. As your quill scratches across the paper, you consider what final wisdom you might offer, what central understanding your journey through Europe's torture chambers has provided. After much reflection, you settle on this: torture reveals more about the societies that institutionalize it than about the individuals who endure it. This insight that torture functions as a mirror reflecting social values, fears, and contradictions represents your most profound conclusion. The chamber's existence exposes tensions between stated principles and actual practices, between theological ideals and administrative realities, between human empathy and institutional requirements. In medieval Christian Europe, a religion centered on a tortured savior simultaneously condemned cruelty and authorized systematic suffering. Societies that celebrated mercy in their literature and art maintained chambers specifically designed to maximize pain. Legal systems, ostensibly pursuing truth, employed methods that reliably produced falsehood under duress. These contradictions reveal medieval torture not as an aberration, but as a manifestation of fundamental social tensions between mercy and security, between individual rights and collective protection, between bodily integrity and state authority. The chamber exists where these tensions converge, a physical space where abstract contradictions become concrete practices. Your final reflections touch on why medieval torture eventually faced questioning and reform. The change came not primarily from moral evolution, but from practical reconsideration. As judicial systems developed more sophisticated evidence standards, torture's unreliability became increasingly problematic. As political legitimacy began requiring popular consent rather than just fear, openly brutal practices became liability rather than asset. This pragmatic rather than purely ethical shift explains why torture's official abandonment never meant its complete elimination. When officially sanctioned torture became politically inconvenient, it simply went underground, continuing in practice while denied in principle. This pattern of official disavowal coupled with unofficial continuation characterized torture's evolution from the Enlightenment forward. These insights about institutional contradictions, pragmatic rather than moral reforms, and official versus actual practices constitute the wisdom earned through your life's unwanted education in the torture chamber. They represent understanding purchased at terrible personal cost, yet valuable for those seeking to comprehend how sophisticated societies accommodate practices that contradict their stated values. As you finish your written account, sealing it within your family Bible for future generations, you realize that the most important legacy of your experience isn't the physical suffering endured, but the perspective gained. You have seen behind a curtain most never peer past, witnessed the machinery of power at its most naked and direct. This perspective allows you to recognize similar patterns in less extreme social practices, the ways institutions everywhere employ various combinations of fear, pain, and reward to shape behavior. The chamber represents not an aberration, but the most extreme expression of control mechanisms operating throughout society in more subtle forms. In your final days, as Tudor England continues its religious and political transformations around you, you find a measure of peace in this historical understanding. Your suffering, while personal and profound, connects to broader patterns stretching backward and forward through time. The chamber's logic, using pain to extract compliance, exists wherever power operates without restraint, manifesting differently across cultures and eras but maintaining consistent psychological foundations. This connection between your individual experience and universal patterns offers meaning to otherwise senseless suffering. The torture chamber becomes not just a site of personal trauma, but a lens for understanding power's operation throughout human society. A terrible but instructive example of authority's fundamental relationship to physical bodies. As your life draws to its close in Tudor England, you leave behind both visible and invisible legacies. The visible ones, your merchant business, your family, your possessions, will persist for some generations before fading into historical anonymity. The invisible legacy, your understanding of systematic cruelty and institutional contradiction, remains preserved in your written account, waiting for readers who might benefit from its painful wisdom. And so your story ends where it began, in England, under a monarchy that still maintains the Tower's chambers, within a society still shaped by the distant threat they represent. Your journey through Europe's varying torture systems has brought you full circle geographically, while transforming you intellectually, providing perspective impossible for those who never experienced the chamber's realities. This perspective, seeing systematic cruelty not as aberration but as institutional practice, recognizing torture's social functions beyond individual cases, understanding official narrative's divergence from lived experience, represents your final contribution to historical knowledge. Though you could not save yourself from the chamber's attentions, your insights might help future generations recognize and resist similar patterns in their own times. The wisdom earned through suffering becomes your legacy, a testament to how even humanity's darkest practices can yield important understanding when critically examined by those who survive them. The torture chamber, terrible as it was, provided education available nowhere else. Direct confrontation with power's fundamental relationship to pain, fear, and compliance. As night falls on your final evening, your thoughts return to that first descent into the tower's underground chambers so many years ago. The fear you felt then has transformed into something more complex, a comprehension of why such places exist, how they function beyond their stated purposes, and what they reveal about the societies that maintain them. This comprehension doesn't erase the nightmares or heal the physical scars, but it provides context that makes them bearable, threads connecting individual suffering to collective patterns and historical processes. Your experience in the chamber, while intensely personal, participates in institutional practices spanning centuries and continents. With this understanding providing cold comfort, you drift towards sleep one final time, your journey through medieval Europe's darkest institutions complete. The wisdom gained at such terrible cost now passes to future generations who might recognize similar patterns in their own times without requiring direct experience of the chamber's horrors. And perhaps that represents the most valuable legacy of all, the possibility that understanding history's darkest practices might help prevent their recurrence or continuation, that by comprehending why medieval torture chambers existed and how they function, future societies might better recognize and resist institutional cruelty in their own eras, whatever forms it might take. This hope that painful knowledge might serve preventive purpose offers meaning to otherwise senseless suffering. The chamber's legacy becomes not just trauma, but education, not just damage, but insight. Through this transformation of experience into understanding, even history's darkest chapters provide valuable illumination for the future. As your story concludes, this insight remains its final offering, that confronting rather than ignoring humanity's capacity for systematic cruelty provides the best hope for eventually transcending it. The medieval torture chamber, properly understood, becomes not just a site of historical horror, but a lesson in recognizing and resisting similar patterns wherever and whenever they emerge. With this wisdom as your legacy, your journey through medieval Europe's torture chambers concludes, a dark but instructive chapter in the broader human story of justice, power, suffering, and eventual reform. The experience nobody would survive even a day within becomes, through historical perspective, a lens for understanding dynamics that persist long after the chamber's official abandonment. And there, in the space between historical specificity and universal patterns, lies the chamber's most important lesson, that understanding our darkest practices offers the best hope for eventually moving beyond them toward forms of justice that maintain security without requiring systematic suffering to do so.